this on? Since I'm going to sit down. And I'm going to sit down. My voice may not carry, but I'm assuming it carries with this thing if I can get it to work there. Does that work? I can't hear you. Fine. Also a little deaf, remember. Okay, well, as Bettina said, I want to thank Bettina for giving me this opportunity. Last spring, I started reading this one document, which was an application by Atstane for employment by Akita Domain. And I found it lots of fun, but I just read it, and then I took it all back to the States and sort of forgot about it. And then Bettina said, well, why don't you participate in this workshop? And I thought, well, this would be a good time to go over the document, which I don't have. So the only thing I was able to do is, Kate fortunately had some of it. And so the very back, you've got the last page of the outline gives you an idea of what this thing looks like. But I'm assuming that you all pretty much, and this is a small group, and I'm assuming that you know that who Atstane was, that he was important for the way he did research on ancient history as opposed to philology or poetry, and the field work he did on the unseen world and his devotion to the gods. But I think less well known is that at the end of his life, he ends up going into exile in Akita. And this is something that he wasn't expecting. And in addition to having to go in, he was sent into exile by the shogunate. And the shogunate also told him that he should stop publishing, and since publishing was a major source of income, this meant that he and the family he left in Edo, his daughter, his son-in-law, and their children, had no obvious means of support. So it was essential then for him to convince Akita to give him a rank office and stipend. And for that reason, he wrote the document that you see on the back that I'm going to introduce today. It lays out his achievements not by explaining what Atstane was trying to say, but by claiming validation for his scholarship insofar as he had gained recognition in the eyes of other people. It's a self-statement. It reminds me very much of the statements I have to write to get merit increases at the University of California. It's very boastful in tone, in other words, and summons every accolade Atstane ever received to bolster his assertion that Akita should recognize his worth by providing him with an income. And mainly it does this by listing the people whose support or recognition he achieved and he wanted to have made known. Miyachi Masato has called this a basic document for research into Atstane's life, but it has never been published, nor is it ever known. So far as I know, the only copy is in Akita. It is not in the Hirata Keimonjo at Rekihaku. And Watanabe Kinzo, who wrote this monumental Hirata Tsukani no Kenkyu, does not refer to it at all. And from some of the things that he says, I think he never saw it. And since most scholars today base their accounts of Atstane's life on Kinzo's work, since Kinzo didn't know about it, nobody else seems to know about it either. But I think it's a very interesting document, mainly because it took me so long to read. But it provides one perspective, it provides one evidence for one perspective on Atstane's social networks. Other scholars have emphasized Atstane's relations with his colleagues, as Mark McNally does, or the commoners, especially cultivators, as Haratunian has done. Miyachi Sensei and his group have focused on the nationwide network that grew out of his teachings, and I think that's something in what you're doing too, right, Gideon? So, I mean, people always live their lives enmeshed in webs of relationships, but my question is, when do these webs become social networks? A social scientist would want to quantify for characteristics such as density, but frequency of interaction alone does not a social network make. And some of you may be made uneasy that based on this document, I will be discussing single meetings or even nothing more than indirect contact as though they contributed to Atstane's social network. But I think they qualify, these meetings, these indirect contacts, if they were then sustained through correspondence or if they were more definitively sustained through memory. So one issue I want to address today is what constitutes a social network, who determines its composition and purpose. Otsutani devoted considerable energy to scraping acquaintance with the great and near great, sometimes with laughable results, especially in the eyes of later historians. And each historian, of course, emphasizes those individuals whose inclusion fits his or her argument. Actually, it's all his except for me. Would all the people whose approval Otsutani sought have included him in their networks? I doubt it. And this is an issue I ran up against when I was working on Matsuo Taseko, that she knew all sorts of people and referred to them repeatedly, and they ignored her. So that, given that this application for appointment was written for a specific purpose, while it reveals one perspective on Otsutani's perception of its networks, it conceals his agency in seeking approval by making it appear that the great and near great sought him out, and it ignores men who hindered his career and his failures at furthering it. Nevertheless, I think the document is valuable for addressing questions of how networks are constituted, how they are used, and what constitutes their links or nodes. One of the interesting things about this thing is that it's constructed not chronologically but hierarchically. Otsutani began with the people he met on his trip to Kyoto in 1823, and those are listed on this sort of outline that I did, which is mainly just names, since we're doing out networks. This 1823 is the year that Watanabe calls the most notable in his life, because in this year he achieved three things. He got imperial recognition, he met Motori Norinaga's descendants Ohira and Haruniwa, and he visited Norinaga's grave. If you go to Norinaga's grave today, you'll see a big stele that he had erected there. What makes it even more remarkable is that before he left Edo, Otsutani broke off his relations with the Matsuyama domain. He'd achieved these through adoption, and they gave him a status as a low-ranking retainer. But when he breaks off relations, he becomes a ronin at best, or at worst, a person of undeterminable status in a system in which Mibun defined identity. So he's going to Kyoto without any real identity at all. In this document, Otsutani states only that he went to Kyoto, and while there, was able to present his writings to the retired emperor, Empress Dowager Omiya, and the emperor. Other sources tell us that the Yoshida family of Shinto priests had contacted Otsutani through the imperial abbot resident at Kaneiji, and I'll talk more about this abbot later. And Watanabe assumes that this abbot also provided a conduit to the Tomino Koji family, which is the first ones listed there. Of particular interest to me is the way Otsutani's works came to the attention of these august beings, because it provides evidence that a crucial link in building networks, at least these networks, was provided by women. Now, in this application for appointment, Otsutani documents the route his writings took in reaching imperial attention. McNally points out that Otsutani never received official endorsement from the imperial court, but it needs to be emphasized that the imperial court was not then in the business of officially endorsing scholarship, at least not by outsiders such as Otsutani. Instead, Otsutani received informal, what he calls nai-nai. It can also be translated as secret, but I think informal really works better. Recognition, a mark of approval that no other nativist scholar enjoyed. And he received permission to put a seal at the beginning of his text stating seen and approved by heaven. And you've got a copy of the seal on the outline. So how did this all come about? It's on the first page there, Tenran Heikan. According to the application for appointment, because Tomino Koji Jubu third rank Sadanao already revered the study of the ancient way, I got to know him through ancient studies, and through his mediation, I presented a number of my works and a catalog of my works to the Sento Gosho. Now, Otsutani never names the retired emperor. He never names anybody, if truth be told. We know him as Kokaku. Otsutani then offers further explanation by quoting a letter from Sadanao, which states how the writings were presented to the retired emperor, and the Koshiju reported that he was deeply impressed by the import of your work. Although the abrupt notification ought to be widely disseminated out of deference to others' ears, it is thus being informally passed along by this lower official. Okay, so this Kojishu, who is she? Well, she is Sadanao's daughter, Teruko, died in 1828, and she bore Kokaku $3. In other words, she was his concubine. He had 9 daughters, so she had to be at least one of his favorites. These daughters were, of course, born and raised in the Tomino Koji house, but their mother lived at court, thus tying the Tomino Koji tightly to Kokaku's personal network and making it available to Atsutane. So this is one woman. Another important Kyoto connection was Mutobe Tokika, priest at Muko Shrine, and his adopted son and nephew, Yoshika. Yoshika had visited Edo earlier in 1823 at age 17, and he had become Atsutane's disciple then. Fortuitously for Atsutane, Tokika's elder sister, we don't know her name, was the wet nurse to Princess Onjin, and Princess Onjin was daughter to Empress Dowager Omiya. And Omiya was the eldest daughter of Emperor Go-Momozono and Empress to Kokaku. This was the first time in something almost 400 years that the daughter of an emperor had also been married to a reigning emperor, or an emperor who reigned. Now, Onjin was long past the time when she would have needed a wet nurse, but this connection remained. Furthermore, this elder sister to the Mutobe was friends with Reisen from the Ogimachi Sanjo family, the highest-ranking woman serving Omiya. According to Atsutane, Mutobe Uemon inquired as to whether he would be able to present documents containing my writings to the current emperor. Reisen had a conversation with the chief inter-official at court, this is Nagahashi no Tsubone, and through arrangement with Nagahashi no Tsubone, the presentation was made. Nagahashi no Tsubone is, of course, a woman. On that occasion, Reisen's secretary, Hyogo, another woman, wrote a letter to Uemon, and I in return received and saved it. And this letter says, oh, the emperor really liked his writings, and he was really pleased that Omiya, too, had seen them. Atsutane noted that because Omiya has the position of being the retired emperor's consort, she is the most important person at court. This for the benefit of Akita officials who might not have appreciated just how significant her approval was. And there was more stuff that Atsutane had other interactions with Kokaku, but I'm going to skip that. Although he explained these august connections at the beginning of his application for appointment, he never laid eyes on any of them, or they on him. Instead, he had to rely on men related to women who served at court, making for a very convoluted series of linkages. Atsutane also let the Akita domain officials know that high-ranking court nobles had sought him out as well. For example, the Tsuchi Mikado family claimed descent from Abe no Seimei, unlike Abe no Seimei, and specialized in Omiodo divination. The family head in 1823 was apparently Harechika, and he sent a message to Atsutane asking for his help in establishing the principles for selecting days on which to perform a ceremony for childbirth and other important observances. Now, Harechika knew the term for making the selection, but the transmission for actually making it had been lost. So Atsutane provides him with a plausible method based on speculation. Atsutane admitted this was suisoku, and Harechika was delighted. Thereafter, Atsutane was allowed to join the students at the Imperial Observatory and conduct research into heat and cold. Every time Harechika visited the observatory, he granted Atsutane an audience. And Atsutane also visited other nobles who are listed on this sheet that I handed out. One of them, the factotum for Fushimi no Miya, this Wakai Jubu Daiho, was descended from Sugawara no Michizane, and because of his descent from Sugawara no Michizane, he had a secret transmission from the heavenly gods, which Fushimi no Miya allowed him to confer on Atsutane as well. So he gets text and an oral transmission. Atsutani also received requests from lower-ranking nobles and commoner officials to go to their residences to interpret texts, but these he did not bother to name. Now, Atsutani traveled to Kyoto only once, but the validation he received there stood him in good stead for the rest of his career. Although it did not silence his critics, and may have even heightened their opposition, it emboldened his supporters, gained him new adherents, and vindicated his scholarship. And for the purposes of this application for appointment, it demonstrated that he had the credentials worthy of a scholar above and beyond any specific school. Nevertheless, this is an aside. Do I have time for an aside? Not really. I'll go on. I'll forget about that. Anyway, he spent most of his life in Edo, and it was in Edo that he established his widest and most durable networks. I need to point out that he knew people from many different walks of life, including actors, officials, temple priests, and doctors. Most of them are left out of the application for appointment. Instead, he focuses on names that might impress his superiors. And he starts at the top, as you can see. In 1830, when Ieyoshi was still living in the heir's quarters at Edo Castle, Atsutani received word that Ieyoshi would like to see his writings. And this request came through Orie, a secretary in the Ooku, and aunt to Atsutani's disciple in the accounts office, Kojima Yusuke. By having the request go through a woman, Ieyoshi was able to keep the entire matter informal, once again nai-nai, off the public record, just as members of the imperial family had done in Kyoto. Such tactics gave Ieyoshi a cover of plausible deniability when his officials later decided to send Atsutani into exile. Even so, such were the benefits of using women as conduits that Atsutani could still claim that the shogun himself had approved of his work. At the same time that Atsutani's links to the great came through women suggests just how far down he was in the status system, that those were the only people he could rely on. A woman also mediated Atsutani's most enduring connection to Kyoto through the imperial abbots at Kan-Eiji, and this is on the next page. This is showing who had been the wet nurse to Shunin, and Shunin was son of Arisugawa Orihito and adopted by Kokaku in 1808 before being sent up to Edo as the abbot. She was also the mother to Toyota Masaoya, one of Atsutani's friends in Edo. Once again, the request she delivered was informal, to present his writings to the abbot. This began a long and satisfying relationship because the abbot summoned Atsutani for interviews, gave Atsutani permission to visit him, and engaged him in long conversations about the ancient way. In 1836, Atsutani gave Shunin a copy of Daifu So Kokuko that Shunin liked so much he wanted sent to Kokaku and Ninko. Shunin made the arrangements by asking the Kanpaku Takatsukasa to be the go-between. Other nobles also wanted copies, even Takatsukasa himself. Now this was a controversial text. It extracted legends regarding Okuninushi no Mikoto from ancient Chinese texts based on the premise that if Chinese, Indian, or even Western treatises had legends pertaining to Japan that had subsequently been lost in Japan, they could be used as evidence even if they were of foreign origin. This system of scholarship infuriated Atsutani's nativist rivals, and thus it was particularly important for him to claim an imperial sanction, at least by the retired emperor. But beyond that, Atsutani enjoyed a long and fruitful relationship with the Kan-Eiji abbots. The Wakanomiya on this handout was the nephew of the Jugo-sama, and when he went to, his name is Kosho, when he went to live in Kan-Eiji, Atsutani met him as well. According to Atsutani, the young abbot enjoys scholarship, and he has asked me various questions related to scholarly matters. I mainly talk to him regarding studies of the ancient way. And so Atsutani visits these guys regularly. At the ceremonial New Year's visits, he had the privilege of presenting his greetings individually. He received gifts of the season directly from the abbot's own hands. This was a great honor. And he was very frustrated when he had to go into exile at the beginning of the year and missed out on these ceremonial audiences. But fortunately, the abbot had to go to Nikko, and he stayed in a town close to where Atstani was waiting out the winter. So Atstani got to go and meet him there. And the abbot there, this is on his way into exile in 1841, the abbot kindly gave Atstani beans for warding off demons that he used as a talisman for himself, the little mame things. As Atstani proudly stated, this is an extremely important item to have received. Because the abbots linked Kyoto and Edo, they provided Atstani with high-level contacts in both places, contacts that he used to reinforce the connections he had already made and build new ones. They figured prominently in the network he constructed through years of social interactions and then reconstructed in his application for appointment. Men of such high rank and status would never have stooped to join his school, but this did not stop them from demonstrating a keen appreciation for his scholarship, despite Atstani's attacks on Buddhism as a foreign religion unsuitable to the Japanese character. Now I want to now go on and talk about some of the daimyo we've got here. Atstani met a number of daimyo, but he mentions only 4 in this application for appointment. And one was Nariyasu, to whom he presented his writings, and this is just a one-time deal as far as I can tell, and Watanabe doubts that it really happened at all. He had more success with the lords of Owari and Mito. In the application for appointment, Atstani states, "I was ordered to visit Lord Owari and Mito to have audiences with them, so at New Year's, the 5 seasonal changes, and other occasions, I have gone there to offer my congratulations." Now this makes it appear that the lords acted as agents, that they're the ones who sought out Atstani, whereas in fact we know from other sources that Atstani pulled every string he could to get these wishes, to get permission to visit these guys. He wanted to present his writings, visit the compounds, and receive audiences. Contact with Owari began in 1821 when Naritomo was the daimyo, but he did not have his first true audience until 1828 when Nariharu had taken over. In 1830, Atstani wrote a long, carefully worded petition to be taken on as a regular Owari retainer with a stipend. Now, he received a stipend, but he did not receive official appointment as a retainer. He kept agitating for more regular employment, only to be told in 1834 that owing to certain difficulties, the stipend would no longer be paid. Nevertheless, Atstani was told he could encourage the visits as before. He'd already received permission to visit the Mito compound and Koishikawa when Narinobu was still the lord. He then developed closer relations with the more famous Nariaki, but he never received the position in the Mito Historiographical Institute that he desired. But these failures, of course, had no place in this application for appointment. Instead, Atstani boasted that Nariaki was so interested in his writings that he wanted even those that had not yet been published. That is, he was willing to read manuscripts. Around 1837, when Nariaki was having a new castle built and planning to excavate the entrance for an armory, he ordered Atstani to present some ancient prayers to use to pacify the soil and begin construction. Atstani, of course, did this and received money. Now, in the cases of Owari and Mito, as with some of the other lords, like Nijo, Atstani never specified which lord he actually met. It may be that in the case of Owari in particular, the relationship was so distant that the individual was irrelevant. The Hirata diary records visits to Owari at least 3 times a month, sometimes more. When Atstani received his first stipend, he went around to everyone he knew from Owari to thank them, and he held a party. From my point of view, developing these connections required so much effort, time, and money, it's hard to see that they were worth it. That Atstani was willing to do what it took to be able to claim a social network that stretched to the upper reaches of society shows how status took precedence over everything else: intelligence, compatibility, convenience. It was obviously important to be seen at the audience and to be able to say one had the right to visit these compounds. Now, Atsutani apparently had a more personal connection with the retired Satsuma lord. This was Shigenobu. And the scroll with the 5 characters, the Genyu Muteki Do, is in Shigenobu's hands. He was apparently a very intelligent man, interested in all sorts of things. His retainers, he kept wanting to do things, and his retainers said no, 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 and so he retired so he could do what he wanted. And one of his interests was Atsutani's ideas. So Shigenobu protected Atsutani, introduced him to Owari, and had some of his disciples, his retainers, become Atsutani's disciples. And this forged a relationship between Satsuma and the Hirata school that lasted through the Meiji Restoration. Atsutani often visited Shigenobu, and also there were 2 retired Satsuma lords, believe it or not. One was Narinobu, and they both lived in Takanawa, which is where I'm living now. For Shigenobu's 88th birthday, Atsutani presented him with a hanging scroll that Atsutani had received in 1823 from Kokaku. The exchange of scrolls with their accompanying documentation, along with other gifts, testified to an intimacy that Atsutani recorded in his application for appointment. And Shigenobu also introduced Atsutani to Wakizaka, this guy Wakizaka Yasutada, who was a daimyo himself and magistrate in temples and shrines, and Atsutani received orders to visit him and have audiences and all that sort of thing. I mean, you wonder how Atsutani had time for scholarship. He was so busy going to audiences and visiting people. But when Yasutada became senior counselor, he then introduced Atsutani to his successor. This is Aoyama Tadanaga, Lord of Sasayama. He also had various relations with Shinto priests, one of them being Shirakawa Suketaka, and he becomes an instructor in the Shirakawa school, receives a certificate to that effect. This connection was mutually beneficial because it gave the Hirata and Shirakawa access to each other's disciples, and it lasted for generations. He also had an odd relationship with the Izumo high priests, the Senkei family and the Kitajima family. These were hereditary high priests, of course, and these 2 families both claimed descent from Ame-no-hito no Mikoto, Amaterasu's second son, thus making them a junior branch to the imperial family. And Atsutani's research validated this lineage, and this made the families very happy, and thereafter they would send him fish at New Year's. He also enjoyed debates with Zen priests, and he engaged this guy, Urin, from Eiheiji in Echizen right before he was sent into exile. Naturally, the priest praised his acumen. So having described so many of these important men, but not all of the important men he ever met, Atsutani ended his application by discussing his relationship with the Norinaga school. And he met, as I say, he meets the Norinaga's descendants Haruniwa and Ohira. He also meets a disciple named Hattori Nakatsune. Now, all of these men were old, and according to Atsutani, they found in him the appropriate successor to Norinaga. They told him to expand on what Norinaga had written, protect the teachings, continue on the true way, and they gave him memorabilia in recognition of his place in the school. Now, the fact that he had to ask, if not beg, for these objects is not mentioned in the application. And Atsutani justified his application to be a teacher in Akita based on what he construed as these men's approval of his teachings. Now, I'm getting toward the end. At the very end of his application, Atsutani mentioned his students, and he said, "I have several hundred disciples, deshi, who have paid fees and over 2,000 monjin." I've never seen this distinction between deshi and monjin before, but I'd love to know if you've seen it. Anyway, we can talk about that. Ever since I received this approval from the Norinaga successors, the number of monjin has continued to increase. Now I even have disciples of disciples, and I have no idea just how many of them there are. Generally speaking, it can be said that there are so many, there is not a province without my monjin. Now, one way to read this application for appointment is as a gloss or an allegory on Atsutani's depiction of the creator gods. The creator gods, created the land, had Amaterasu send down her heavenly grandson to rule over it, And in addition, they created the noble families who assist the emperor in his rule, and these are all named, and they're in the ancient text, and they're named in Atsuttane's treatises as well. But when it came time to create the commoners, the gods were not so careful. Rather than fashioning each one individually, they simply created lots of them, the countless, nameless masses. In like fashion, Atsuttane names the men and women at the top of the social hierarchy, but when it comes to his disciples, many of whom numbered among the commoners, he claimed not to even know how many there were. Now, throughout his career, Atsutane tried to construct social networks that would gain him access to the highborn and mighty. At the same time, he made friends with people who shared his interests. Some functioned in both contexts. Yashiro Hirokata, for example, is mentioned in the application for appointment, and he was a very important man, a personal friend of Atsutane's. And through him, Atsutane met all sorts of intellectuals in Edo, none of whom figure in this application for appointment. Later day lists tend to omit the women who provided crucial links to the great. It would thus appear that networks can be constructed and recalled depending on the circumstances, that different networks fit in different contexts in each person's life, and that trying to fit in any individual, or at least this individual, into a single overreaching network is not necessarily helpful in understanding how he perceived and dealt with his connections. Now, I've spent too much time, but just let me explain what happens to this application for appointment. At the fall of 1841, Atsutane is finally summoned to meet the Karo at Kubota Castle, and the document he received stated, "You have diligently studied the ancient way of the imperial house and written several tins of books. When you went to Kyoto, even the retired emperor perused your writings, and in Edo as well, the shogun examined them informally. Owing to these scholastic achievements, you are appointed to Hatamoto." In addition, Atsutane was granted a 15-person stipend and a 10-ryo salary. In fact, the domain took a cut of both, giving him only a 14-person stipend and 8-ryo. Now, he and his family in Edo had been led to believe that he would receive 150 ryo. So this was very painful. Nonetheless, the Hirata family remained Akita domain retainers until the domain was abolished, and the connections that Atsutane had established through his social networks among the high and mighty continued to serve them well. Okay, that's it.
And then immediately let me start off by thanking you and Sophie University for the chance to share my research here with you today. Although obviously, rather than sharing my own research, I'm much more interested in the other presenters and comments of the audience, especially in regards to today's topic of network studies. I'm very curious to see how other people are attempting to approach, or perhaps hopefully tackling the diffuse and complex subject matter of network studies. But as far as myself, I'm afraid that in today's presentation I won't be addressing network studies as such, although I do think there are quite a lot of points that broach very closely to the subject of network studies. So because there's no time really to go deeply into those points during the presentation, I hope to have time during the Q&A or the final discussion to have some time to delve a little bit deeper into these issues, or hopefully that these issues are as plainly obvious that they require no explanation anyways. So with that disclaimer out of the way, let me start by describing the general outline of my paper, and well, not of this paper, but of my research in general, and describing how this paper fits into the general outline. Very broadly speaking, my interests at the moment lie with filial piety in pre-modern Japan. Now, the word filial piety usually puts half of the audience asleep, and with very good reason, I think, because it's such a commonplace concept, and it appears with such great frequency in the pre-modern sources that everyone, or at least my person, is very much inclined to just block it out and say, like, okay, we know it was of tremendous importance, now let's move on. And I think that that kind of response, that is obviously somewhat exaggerated for my purposes, but that kind of response has valid roots in the way that filial piety has been represented in research. in which it is either treated as a descriptive premise for understanding pre-modern society, so filial piety was of tremendous importance, or it is cited as one of the admonitions in the moral treatises, so thou shalt be filial. And although filial piety is as often mentioned in either one of these two very unexciting forms, it is rarely investigated. And the studies that do focus on filial piety tend to focus on filial piety as it is debated within philosophical texts. And although this, of course, has led to a better understanding of filial piety as a philosophical construct, we have very little to go on when it comes to filial piety as it was practiced and, importantly, experienced in daily life. So ironically, even though it is the practice of filial piety that we find stressed in the moral treatises of the time, it is still this practice that is very much unknown territory to both Japanese as well as Western studies. And the aim of my current PhD at Kyoto University is to come to a better understanding of filial piety in a way that takes into consideration both the concepts and practice. And the way in which I intend to do so is by shifting my focus from filial piety as such to those who actually practice filial piety, namely the filial children, so koshi in Japanese. Now, saying that my focus is on filial children, of course, prompts the question, what constitutes a filial child? When we look at the word, of course, filial piety or a filial child or koshi in Japanese, it's very obvious that it means kokonako, so a child who is filial. And although that description captures the basic meaning, there's a subtle difference between the two phrases in the sense that whereas a child who is filial is a simple description of the behavior of a certain child, a filial child is a sort of honorific way of referring to a child, describing the child as such. And that means that one can become a child who is filial by simply exerting oneself towards one's parents. In order to become a filial child, one needs a third person, or like an other, to acknowledge the behavior so that one is referred to as a filial child. So there are other people who come into play. And in that sense, filial children are thus only created through the evaluation of others. And it is this process of creation, namely when, where, by whom, by what means, and for what purpose, that society's thoughts and ideas about what constitutes a filial child are reflected, and that we can catch a glimpse of how filial piety was situated within everyday life, society, and culture. And I believe that it's only through this kind of approach that we can really begin to appreciate phrases such as filial piety was of tremendous importance. So in that roundabout manner, I hope to, by focusing on the filial child, shed some new light on filial piety and, in a broader sense, virtue in the pre-modern period. With that overall framework outlined, let me describe how today's paper fits into that. I will focus on the celebration of Mankichi. And the word celebration I use as a translation for the Japanese hyosho or kensho. And as far as the celebration of filial children is concerned, it is a subject that is usually treated within the framework of moral indoctrination of commoners by Bakuhan authorities. And the general idea being that the Bakuhan authorities granted monetary rewards to people who displayed exceptional filial piety in order to create moral examples that were then, of course, hopefully followed by other commoners. However, in today's presentation, through an examination of the case of Mankichi, I aim to show two things. First of all, that celebration of filial children was not only a public official consideration, but also a private activity. And secondly, that these private activities should not be understood within the context of moral instruction, but rather as social, cultural, and artistic pursuits. Before I will go into proving those 2 points, I will have to start with a short introduction of our main character, Mankichi. Who was Mankichi, and what was his so-called claim to fame? Mankichi was a boy from a poor family, as always, from Sakashita, 48th station of the Tokaido, at the foot of the Suzuka Mountains that lie stretched between Omi and Ise provinces. His father had died when Mankichi was only 4, and since his mother was ill and unfit to work, this left the burden of raising the family on Mankichi. And in order to make a living, he went out to the Tokaido every day as a porter, carrying the luggage of people over the Suzuka Pass in return for a fee. Now, one day in the fall of 1783, so the 3rd year of Tenmei, Mankichi was encountered by a certain Ishikawa Tadafusa, a hatamoto on his way from Osaka to Edo, and he was working as oban, so guardsman of either Edo Castle, Nijojo, or Osaka-jo. And Tadafusa was intrigued by this boy, well, of course a 4-year-old boy working as a porter on the Tokaido, and he asked him to lead him to his mother. And there, talking to his mother, hearing of their hardships and of Mankichi's filial behavior towards his mother, he concluded that Mankichi was truly a filial child and rewarded him with some money. After leaving Mankichi, Tadafusa then proceeded to tell his story to the people around him, urging them to pay Mankichi a visit whenever they had the chance. And many of them did, and the word of Mankichi continued to spread until in 1787 he was summoned to Edo for an official bakufu reward. Now that is the short biography, the tale of Mankichi, and at first sight it's not particularly extraordinary or interesting. However, from an academical point of view, the thing that makes it interesting is that Ishikawa Tadafusa left a detailed written record of his dealings with Mankichi, and that many of these, well, the copies of this record survive to present day. And I've been able to trace 13 of these copies, and the interesting thing about them is each and every one is slightly different. Now, of course, different in the usual sense that handwritten manuscripts have slightly paraphrased sentences or wrong characters, but also different in the sense that each contains unique content. Content that was added by the people who copied the document as the celebration of Mankichi progressed. Now, the way in which this manuscript circulated and the dynamic way in which it was copied might itself be a subject for another paper, and also a paper that is very much of interest, I believe, to network studies. But today I would like to focus primarily on the context in which Tadafusa created this manuscript. And as regards to this context, there's of course the previously mentioned framework of moral education, and this framework has also been applied to Mankichi's case. And most probably because even Tadafusa mentions in his manuscript himself that his only aim with the document is to, what's his only aim? His aim is to have children model themselves after Mankichi's behavior. Well, of course. However, there are good reasons to remain very skeptical about these kind of claims. And my doubts are grounded, first of all, in the complete lack of evidence that this work was used in a setting of instruction or education. And secondly, there's the following problem, that when you compare the differences and overlap of these 13 copies, it becomes clear that the original copy was completed by Tadafusa in the 10th month of 1785, after which it almost immediately started circulating. Now that, of course, raises the question that if Tadafusa had already discovered Mankichi in the fall of 1783, then why did it take 2 years before he finally decided to write down Mankichi's story and have it circulate? After all, if, as moral instruction theory would suggest, spreading the moral example of Mankichi's filial behavior had been Tadafusa's primary aim, then he could have done so right after he met him in the first place. So I believe that in order to understand Tadafusa's real motives, we have to look at the nature of Mankichi's celebration. So in other words, I believe that the way in which Mankichi is celebrated reveals something about why he is being celebrated in the first place. And during my examination of Mankichi's celebration, I will come to establish the following key elements. First, that of celebration as a cultural activity. And second, the significance of the celebration process. And third, the participation of like-minded men. And after establishing these key elements, I will then conclude by integrating them in what I perceive to be the why of this celebration, which is, to give away the conclusion, social exchange and cultural self-expression. Starting off with the first key element, that of celebration as a cultural activity, we pick up Mankichi's story at the point where Tadafusa, after having met Mankichi for the first time, arrives in Edo, resides there for a month, and then returns to his post in Osaka as a guardsman of the Osaka castle. There in Osaka, he then proceeds to tell Mankichi's story to Sugiura Muniyuki, a Confucian scholar with Sekimon Shingaku roots who operated a private school called Sonseido. And this Muniyuki then brings up the story during one of his lectures, urging everyone with an interest to stop by Tsusaka to visit Mankichi. And in order to make sure that these visitors knew where to find Mankichi, Tadafusa asked a colleague of him, Mitsuhashi Nariteru, also working as an oban, his senpai, maybe like 20 years old or so, to post a sign over Mankichi's door saying, House of Mankichi. And there's the slide I'm very proud of being able to find somewhere totally unrelated to all of this in Wakayama, published as a Ichimai Suri, or Kawaraban, where is it? Oh. Which spread around the time that all of this happened. So I see no reasons to really doubt the fact that this must have been what the sign looked like that was posted on Mankichi's door. Well, the background for this Ichimaisuri is also very interesting and connects again to the Sugiura Muniyuki, and I'm researching that right now, but no conclusive things at the moment. So when this Nariteru visited Mankichi's house to carry out Tadafusa's request to post that thing on the door, he himself was also very impressed by the little boy's filial piety, and he expressed this feeling in a waka poem. And after arriving in Kyoto, Nariteru then showed this poem to his waka teacher, Reise Tamayasu, who, because he was also moved by the story of Mankichi, then also wrote a poem about him. And in order to commemorate that honor of someone of the stature like Reise Tamayasu writing a poem about the lowly commoner Mankichi, Nariteru then copied Tamiyasu's poem on a wooden frame and had it also set up in Mankichi's house, which is the following. So that's the Nadeshiko no, what is it? Korezo Makoto no Hana no Tsuyu, Kakaru mo ari to aware tozo kiku. Which I asked some people very proficient in waka, and it's not a brilliant poem. It's not one of his best works, apparently. Now, I believe that this wooden frame is of great importance in the development of Mankichi's story and his celebration. The Reise house, as I'm sure you all know, was the official poetry house of the court. And by creating a poem about Mankichi, Reise Tamayasu not only acknowledged Mankichi as a filial child, but more importantly, perhaps, through the cultural authority of his poetry, placed Mankichi, who was, after all, nothing but a lowly commoner, in the context of high culture and refinement. And the wooden frame, of course, effectively acted as a symbol, and also very importantly as proof of this cultural value that Tamayasu had bestowed upon Mankichi. And it appears that this symbol and its cultural significance were very much appreciated by those visiting Mankichi's house. For example, two Hatamoto visiting Mankichi's house in the fall of 1785, so very soon after this frame was put up. They spotted the poem and used it as a template to create poetry themselves. And they were not the only ones to do so. Kan Chazan, a Confucian scholar from Bingo province, visited Mankichi in 1794, so somewhat later, and he notes in his journal that the walls of Mankichi's house were completely covered with poems. So it seems like that everyone who visited Mankichi's house was quite inspired by this poem and then wrote their own poems and put it on the wall. After Mankichi received his reward in Edo, a banquet was held in his honor at the residence of Mitsuhashi Nariteru. And again, poetry praising Mankichi was read at the occasion, again based on the original waka of Reise Tamayasu. And Nishiyama Sessai, Confucian scholar from Bichu province, hearing of Mankichi's official reward, writes that Mankichi's reputation was already widely known, so before his award, and that gentlemen had been exchanging poems about him for a long time. Well, it couldn't have been that long, so maybe only like 4 years, but thus it seems that poetry and the poem of Tamayasu in specific seems to have played a large role in the way Mankichi's filial piety was celebrated. Now, the fact that Tamiyasu's poem had this much of an influence suggests that there were people who were sufficiently cultured to appreciate the cultural authority of the Reise house. And we find this to be the case indeed. There were not only many Hatamoto directly involved with Mankichi's celebration, but there's evidence, for example, that Otanampo tried to visit Mankichi while he was in Edo. Nakai Chikuzan invited him to Tokai Tokudo in Osaka. And when the Osaka Jodai, Hotta Masanari, heard that Mankichi was currently visiting the Kaidokudo, he then proceeded to extend his invitation to move the whole party to one of his mansions. And amongst those who visited Mankichi at his home in Suzuka, for example, are Matsudaira Sadanobu and the daimyo of Mito domain, Fukuoka domain, and Hamada domains. So with that kind of lineup, we may well ask the question, what was it that these kind of people, and with these kind of people, I mean that the highly cultured elite, were looking for in someone like Mankichi? Now, there are no records telling us directly of their aims, but as a hint, we might turn our attention back to Kanchazan, who noted that Mankichi's walls were covered in poems. Now, the word he uses there for poems is shika, so shi for kanji, Chinese poetry, and ka for Japanese poetry. Now, Mankichi, as an uneducated commoner, might at best have struggled his way through some hiragana, but Chinese poetry would have been literary chimpun kampun to someone like him. So, if not for the intellectual delight of Mankichi himself, for whom did these people choose to write their poetry? And I believe that the answer, perhaps, or rather obviously, must be for the other cultured visitors of Mankichi's house, and the ones who could read Chinese and Japanese poetry. So in that sense, Mankichi's walls might have been said to function like a sort of bulletin board of culture, with messages written by and for cultured visitors of Mankichi's house. And the reason that Mankichi's house was able to fulfill such a function is, of course, due to the original injection of cultural value by Tamiyasu's poem. Although all of these things do not directly tell us something about Tadafusa's intention in creating the manuscript, they do tell us something about the cultural weight of Tamiyasu's poem and the impact it had on the way Mankichi was celebrated. And we might therefore expect that also Tadafusa was in some way influenced by this poem. And we see this expectation justified when we return our focus to his record and notice that the last event, chronologically speaking, that Tadafusa noted down concerns the previously mentioned visit of two Hatamoto to Mankichi's house and the poems they wrote when confronted there with Tamiyasu's waka. And also when we trace the route of copies of Tadafusa's record after it was completed, we find that it went through the hands of another Hatamoto by the name of Moriyama Takamori, well, famous in his own right. He not only copied the record, but also added his impression of the story after his copy, and he expressed that again in a poem modeled after Tamiyasu's poem. And Moriyama's copy was then copied by two other Hatamoto, one by Sakuma Takayoshi and one by Suzuki Shigemichi, and also they expressed their impressions of the story in a poem modeled after Tamiyasu's waka. So that means that both the last entry before completion as well as the first entry after completion concern Reisei's poem. And therefore I think it's fair to conclude that it was the placement of the wooden frame with Tamiyasu's poem in Mankichi's house 2 years after Tadafusa's initial contact with Mankichi that prompted Tadafusa to decide to finally jot down his dealings with Mankichi. However, although that gives us a cause, a background, it does not provide us with a motive. And in order for the motive, we will have to turn our attention to the remaining two key elements of significance of the celebration process and the participation of like-minded men. So at that point, I have to point out that Mankichi was not the only filial child that Tadafusa celebrated. He was also involved in the celebration of two children from Sumpu, a girl named Maki and a boy named Tajiro. And the evidence comes from the person who wrote the biographies of both of these filial children, Nozawa Masashi, a bunshin living in Sumpu and who happens to be the older brother of Yamagata Daini. In Maki's biography, he describes how he met with Tadafusa and his colleague Habuto Masayasu when they spent the night in Sumpu while on their way to Osaka in 1787. They struck up conversation, and when Nozawa told them the story of a filial girl named Maki that lived in the vicinity, Tadafusa and Masayasu were both very much moved. They visited her house, and they collected money and presents amongst like-minded men. And the celebration of Tajiro unfolds in pretty much the same way, and also in pretty much the same wording in another biography. So it seems that Tadafusa celebrated these children not by himself, but as part of, or perhaps the leader of a group of like-minded men, and most probably his colleagues. The question then, of course, is why did Tadafusa feel it necessary to spread these stories to so-called like-minded men? It might be to collect extra rewards, but they could alleviate the poverty, so that they could alleviate the poverty of the children involved. But that could not have been the only reason, because if that would be the case, there would be no reason to celebrate them as filial children, to waza get the koshi concept and project it on the child. So there must have been a meaning not only in helping these people, but actually in celebrating them as filial children. And secondly, we must note that Tadafusa and his group, although they belonged to a relatively higher elite of Bakufu authority, did not go through official channels in order to celebrate these children. And with official, I mean the official Bakufu reward. And of course, these children in the end did receive an official Bakufu reward, but not because they were reported by these Hatamoto, but just because their stories got famous enough that they reached the ear of the appropriate Bakufu officials through other means. So it seems that there was meaning not only in celebrating these children, but also doing so in a relatively private manner. So apparently the process of creating a filial child possessed the significance of itself. And when we now return our focus to the manuscript and the question of Tadafusa's intention in creating it, we might, well, because the mind of Tadafusa is of course hard to fathom, so we might instead look at the way in which the record was actually put to use. Sources, however, reveal very little, and I've been able to find only 2 instances that refer to this kind of usage or application. The first is the previously mentioned Nozawa Masashi, and he, in 1787, writes yet another biography of a filial boy named Jiemon, also hailing from Sumpu. And in that foreword, he notes that Tadafusa had presented him with a copy of the Mankichi record, and that in return, he had given him the biography he had written about Mankichi. So that means that Tadafusa, 2 years after creating the Mankichi record, is handing out a copy of this work to a bunjin who he, at that moment, had only met for the first place. So they exchanged biographies concerning filial children. And the second source is the journal of, also previously mentioned, Moriyama Takamori. And he writes at the beginning of 1786, so only 1 or 2 months after Tadafusa finished the Mankichi record, that he made a copy of this record at the request of Tadafusa. And that Tadafusa had placed this copy, again, just like the wooden frames, at the home of Mankichi. Now, to pursue that comparison, as I mentioned before, Mankichi at the time was 10 years old, an uneducated commoner. And we therefore cannot assume that he would have been able to understand either the Japanese or Chinese poetry or Tadafusa's record, which is quite heavily on the Chinese characters. So Tadafusa's manuscript was therefore, just as the poems on the wall, probably directed not towards Mankichi, but towards the other cultured visitors of Mankichi's house. And the evidence is admittedly somewhat shallow, merely 2 sources. But I think it's noteworthy that both of these sources suggest that the record was not used in a vertical top-down manner directed at children and lowly commoners as moral theory would have us, but rather that it was shared in a horizontal manner amongst peers or like-minded men. So by now, although admittedly somewhat chaotically, we have established the 3 key elements of celebration as a cultural activity, significance of the celebration process, and participation of like-minded men. And if we are to explain the context and motive of Tadafusa's celebration of Mankichi, we will have to address both, well, not both, these 3 key elements. And of course, perhaps the context that readily springs to mind is that of artistic circles or social circles. In pre-modern Japan, there were many places where those with a shared interest got together to enjoy some form of scholarly, artistic, or literary pursuit. And these places, in Japanese you call them renza, sha, etc., often translated as salon or circle. And these places functioned not only as a place of exchange and appreciation of knowledge and art, but also as a place where that exchange itself could be enjoyed as a process. So with that kind of framework of circles in mind, let me explain a little bit in detail how I perceive the context of Tadafusa's celebration of Mankichi. From his later track record, which I cannot go into right now, but it becomes very obvious that Tadafusa was both a competent statesman as well as one with a strong sense of responsibility for the well-being of the people. And there's no doubt when confronted with people in dire situations, just like Mankichi or Maki, he would have felt the urge to help them. Now this urge, that feeling, that kokorozashi, appears to have been shared by those around him, so-called like-minded men, which I have used throughout this paper as the, if it wasn't obvious already, as the translation for doshi, so kokorozashi o onajiku suru mono. It's people with the same ambition. Through the existence of these doshi, of these like-minded men, the knowledge that one is not alone in cherishing certain ideals and ambitions, but that there's a group of peers who share these, is sure to have strengthened their resolve, this kokorozashi, even further. However, when it comes to expressing this kind of resolve, it appears it just wasn't enough to report these cases as a bakushin, as like a simple, bureaucratic tezuzuki. These men were all well educated and considered themselves not only part of the bureaucratic elite, but also of the cultural elite. And in order to express themselves sufficiently, not only as bakushin, but also as bunjin, the scene of just merely helping a poor boy who happened to be filial had to be transformed into the celebration of a filial child. And I think that is the reason that ultimately Tadafusa Kumsuis chose not the official route of bakufu reward, but the private, social, literary, and cultural route of celebration. And on that note, I would like to conclude my paper. Still some open threads in regards to the story itself, as well as to the connections to my research of filial piety, as well as the overall network studies theme today. But I think, as I mentioned before, that there might be some time to either go into these points. But I'd rather hear other people's comments than hear myself talk for another 30 minutes. So thank you for your attention.
Well, Professor Gramlich-Oka, people at Sophia University, thank you very much for this opportunity. Glad to be able to share my dissertation project and to be able to speak in English for a change. It's really nice. But because I'm speaking in English, I'll be using PowerPoint as opposed to preparing a huge resume. And also, it's really nice to be speaking after the two speakers, and there were a lot of questions about Hirata Kokugaku, and some of them will be addressed here. Professor Walthall spoke about dried fish. I'll be speaking about dried abalone as a gift to the head school. Okay, so we'll get started. So the title is Northern Link in the Hirata Network, Tsuruya Ario and the Tsugaru Group. So my presentation today will consider the theme of network in the context of Hirata Kokugaku, namely through a group of Hirata disciples from Tsugaru, or Hirosaki domain as it's formerly known, led by Tsuruya Ario, who were closely connected in their scholarship with the Ibukinoya Academy in Edo. So to give some background, I will begin by talking briefly about new developments in the study of Hirata Kokugaku and look at representative research that has studied the Hirata school's local projection and taking up aspects of network. There are many, I'm only talking about two of them. I will then introduce the Tsugaru group of Hirata disciples, the main subject of my dissertation research, followed by an examination of parts of 5 letters exchanged between the Hirata school and Ario, and between other members of the group as well. I hope this analysis will shed new light on the diversity in Hirata Kokugaku's local projection. In recent years, we have witnessed a boom in Hirata studies with the publication of several important works in Japanese and English. Unlike the pre-war exaltation of Atsutane as a champion of Japanese nationalism, or post-war studies that were often biographical and focused on its place within Kokugaku or contribution to pre-war nationalistic ideology, This new revival shows a concern with contextualizing Atsutane within late Tokugawa society and its broad intellectual discourse. One catalyst for this renewed scholarly activity has been the effort of scholars working with the Rekihaku, the National Museum of Japanese History, the site of a special exhibit in 2004 entitled Meiji Ishin to Hirata Kokugaku, or the Meiji Restoration in Hirata Nativism. This was headed by Professor Miyachi Masato. With the cooperation of the Hirata Shrine and Atsutane's descendants, they have introduced to the public a vast array of new materials surrounding Atsutane, his head school, the Ibukinoya, and his national network of students. These new materials serve as tools for producing a more nuanced perspective on Hirata Kokugaku and its diversity at the local level. So yeah, there are about 10,000 items, letters, original documents housed at Rekihaku. Here I would like to briefly introduce two representative works from past research that deal with Hirata Kokugaku's local projection, and in general terms take up the theme of network. In his seminal work, Somo no Kokugaku, or Grassroots Nativism, Ito Tasaburo defines grassroots nativism as Shomin no Kokugaku, or nativism of the common people. He focuses his discussion around the relationship between Shomin Seikatsu, or the life of the common people, and Kokugaku. He goes on to characterize the academic nature of Atsutane School as more on the streets than in the study, more Shinto-centered than literary, and he rules out that such a characteristic was based solely on Atsutane's personal character alone. Along with its new theology and message of the afterlife, Hirata Kokugaku became widely popular throughout Japan, with student enrollment at the time of Atsutane's death numbering at around 550 and peaking at over 4,200 in early Meiji, with students in all but one of the 60 provinces throughout Japan. So one of the most comprehensive studies of the Hirata school is Harry Hartunian's Things Seen and Unseen, Discourse and Ideology in Tokugawa Nativism. Hartunian describes how Atsutane routinized the ancient way as it spread from Edo to rural areas. He states, in the early 1830s, nativism left the cities for the countryside. Its transports to rural Japan, especially to the eastern regions and the vicinity of the Japan Sea, produced a transformation of its message that conformed to the needs of its new placement. Kokugaku had been, from the time of its inception, an urban phenomenon. The crucial link was provided by Hirata's efforts to constitute a subject for discourse through the routinization of his teachings at the Ibukiya, which established a natural relationship between his conception of the way and the content of everyday life lived by his subject, the ordinary folk. Hartunian shows it was through routinizing the ancient way that naturally connected the way and content of everyday life of ordinary folk that Hirata Kokugaku became popularized. He emphasizes ancestor veneration as a vital link between the seen and unseen, as well as the interaction between worship and labor. He also shows the strategies Atsutane employed in proliferating his message to a general audience, pointing out that Hirata saw the connection between discourse and audience early and used idioms of common speech in texts such as Tamadaski and Ibuki Oroshi. Atsutane is also shown to have involved his students and listeners in the process of transcribing, publishing, and writing prefaces to his works. And I think that this is related to that question that came up about publishing, and where they went to recruit students. Now, turning to the main focus of this paper, the history of Hirata Kokugaku in Hirosaki Domain began in 1857 when Tsuruya Aryo enrolled in the Ibukinoya. Atsutane had died 14 years prior, and his adopted son Hirata Kanetane had succeeded him in managing the head academy in Edo. By the time of the Meiji Restoration in 1868, Atsutane's students numbered as many as 160 in Mutsu Province, where Hirosaki Domain was located. And during a span of 14 years from 1857 to 1871, 18 students from Hirosaki enrolled in the Hirata school. The students' ages at time of enrollment ranged from their early 20s to late 50s, and among them Tsuruya Aryo and Hirao Rosen were the eldest and are considered core members. Most members of this group were introduced to the Hirata school by Ario, making him the main local contact. And it is evident from Kanetane's letters addressed to him that Ario was primarily responsible for managing book orders and purchases. So I'm going to talk briefly about my dissertation project on the Tsugaru group of Hirata disciples. And 5 themes that I take up. One is like the diversity that we see at the local level. I think a lot of past research has equated grassroots nativism, grassroots kokugaku with kokugaku by agriculturalists. And certainly, they make up a large percentage of the students. But here I deal with a group of townspeople, chonin. There's also a number of Shinto priests, and there's also a female member. And I think, Professor Walthall talks about Matsuo Tasako and mentions that there's, I think, 29 female disciples of Atsutane. So I happen to have one of the other 29 in my group. And when I look at their activity and their writings, I see a strong sense of individuality even within their group and a sense of agency. Secondly, there's a strong concern in the group for the invisible kakurio realm towards the afterlife. Thirdly, there's an interplay of identities, between Mikuni, divine Japan, and Tsugaru no Kuni, Tsugaru domain. And this is quite interesting to me because, of course, these people they recognize themselves as from being Tsugarujin, and there's a lot of discourse about Tsugaru no Kuni and Mikuni. Fourthly, kokugaku and ethnography and their relationship. Particularly the person that I take up, Hirao Rosen, he did a lot of ethnographical writing and study, and so the relationship between the two I'm hoping to explore. And finally, I think this is a topic that allows me to talk about the Meiji Restoration from the perspective of northern Japan. So how did the Hirosaki group, or the Tsugaru group, so removed from the head school in Edo, conduct their nativist studies? Letters are very telling of their academic practices. Atsutane's Ibukinoya is known for its informational network nationwide, as enabled by the Hikyaku courier system of the day, delivering letters, gifts, and books to and from the head school and its registered students throughout Japan. And we see letters exchanged regularly between the Hirata school and the Tsugaru group, namely through Ario, but later on through other members also. The first letter written by Ibukinoya head Hirata Kanetane to Ario is dated the 12th day of the 9th month in 1856. Kanetane opens the letter by asking for verification on whether Tsuruya was his family name or given name. And I've got the image of the original letter. This is a letter by Kanetane. Fortunately, it is transcribed in the Kenshi. But there are some. Well, I mean, there are. I noticed just yesterday that there's some inconsistencies with the dates and that. So the first letter from Hirata Kanetane to Tsuruya Ario is dated 1856, 9th month, 12th day. Please bear with me. I'm citing a bunch of really dense passages here. On the 18th of last month, a man named Tatsuyama Matsuzo delivered to me your letters dated the 28th of the 6th month and 19th of the 7th month, which I have read. Now, last year I received your letters for the first time, and I see your sympathy for us ever growing, especially at this time, giving us a gift of a box of white dried abalone produced in your domain. Your considerable gifts always come from deep generosity. I express my deep thanks. I immediately offered some of it before the spirit of our ancestor, Senjin, referring to Atsutane. We are grateful for your ceaseless concern from afar. Although you are aware of Ogasawara Kenryu of Akita domain, sending me letters directly is actually most convenient. For me personally, it is not one bit inconvenient. so please do not refrain. While I am especially busy with correspondence with the provinces, due to the fact that our scholarship is steadily spreading, I do not spare myself the labor one bit. I have received your questions based on your interest in our ancestor. As you know, his posthumous title is Kamutama no Mihashira no Ushi, Deity and Master, August Pillar of the Spirit. He died on the 11th day of the 9th month in Tempo 14. He was 68 years old at death. He was born in Ae 5. It is most proper that you also conduct worships, reisai, of his deceased spirit and use a portrait. However, the above-mentioned portrait is one drawn by someone from Akita, and although people say it closely bears his resemblance, it does not measure up to the heart of our ancestor. And for this reason, I personally do not use a portrait. The posthumous title was received from a head family of priestly affairs, who also gave the inscription, and this is used in the aforementioned spirit worship. Besides this, there is food that he favored, and we also use objects. Now, again, you ask about the timeline, Nempu, but these books have not yet been formally transcribed. Although preparations are being made, beginning with Koshiden, the final transcriptions of several manuscripts are still incomplete. The timeline is delayed. At this time, concerning available materials and new orders, I have gathered those available books as well as the woodblock prints and offer them to you as listed here. So here we see a list of 3 works that are manuscripts at this point, Koshiden, starting with Koshiden, and then we see works that are already in print at this time. You see with Tamadasuki, he's sending volume 8 because he already possesses up to volume 7. So, in this long and detailed letter, Kanetane thanks Ario for a gift of dried abalone he had sent, stating that he offered some before the spirit of the late ancestor Atsutane. This is only the first of various local products the Tsugata group sent to the school. I think there's a mention of kombu as well, and there's other products as well. There's also a mention of a man of Akita, Ogasawara Kenryu, who appears to have served as a messenger for delivering Ario's letters to Kanetane. But Kanetane insists his letters be sent directly to him. The Ibukinoya head declares that despite his busy correspondence with students in the provinces, the spread of Hirata Kokugaku provides him enough satisfaction and motivation to carry on with the letter writing. Kanetane's biographical sketch of Atsutane in response to Ario's questions reminds us that Ario, based in Hirosaki and seeking to join the Hirata school, actually had only limited and fragmented knowledge of the academy's founder. Kanetane explains that Atsutane's portrait was painted in Akita, the place of his exile in his last years, and is used in the spirit worship of the master within the Hirata school, although not by adopted son Kanetane himself. If we look at Ario's collection of essays entitled Tsuriya Bunshu, we see a description of how Ario worshipped the Atsutane portrait sent with this letter. The letter also makes mention of offerings of the master's favorite foods, and we also see the beginning of the Tsugata group's many book purchases, though the list of publications, of course, is incomplete. At the time of Atsutane's death in 1843, less than half of his works were published, and recent scholars such as Yoshida Asako emphasized the importance of publishing data, for gauging Kokugaku's dissemination to local communities. Kanetane's second letter to Ario, dated 3 months later on the 6th of the first month in 1857, explains the procedure for enrolling in the Ibukinoya, accompanied by a pledge form to be filled out. Let us now examine the second letter and accompanying pledge form. Regarding your insistence on enrolling directly as my student, I received details of your intentions in your letter. However, I am essentially an expert, and as I do not have the aptitude to teach beyond our ancestors' writings, I refuse anyone that requests to enroll as my student. So for those who offer enrollment gifts, I show them before the ancestor's spirit. and therefore we will refer to you as the ancestor's posthumous student, Senjin Botsugo no Monjin, and make arrangements to record your name in the student registry. If this is acceptable, please let us know without hesitation. So the accompanying pledge form. Words of the pledge. I seriously desire to receive the guidance of the Master on the way of the divine age of the divine August country, and according to this guidance, I shall be enlisted on the registry and make haste toward the way and humbly receive the teachings. Henceforth, as I receive the teachings, I will learn intently and learn from the divine way, and will not oppose the law of the Lord, and furthermore will not harbor offensive or suspicious thoughts toward the Master. If I should defy this pledge, may the awesome heavenly kami and earthly kami know and see this and give punishment with deep reverence. And below, each enrolling disciple writes their country, Mutsu Province, Tsugaru Domain, Hirosaki Castle Town. He was 50 years at the time, his common name, and the time that he enrolled, and the formal name and personal stamp. So this is an image of the form, and as you see, it's written in Manyogana, and was sent to anybody that was wishing to enroll. In this second letter, reference is made to Ario's request to formally enroll as Kanetane student, but the academy head declines, insisting he devotes himself solely to spreading Atsutane's teachings. Gifts offered by enrolling students are offered before the Master's spirit, and Ario, like the other students who entered Ibukiniya after Atsutane's death, is admitted as the ancestor's posthumous student. The pledge form is distributed pledge form is distributed, eliciting a pledge of devotion to receive Master Atsutane's guidance on the way of the divine age of the divine August country, and to learn from the divine way. Observance of the law of the Lord and reverence to Atsutane are also pledged. The Ibukinoya Monjincho, or Ibukinoya Student Registry, records that shortly after, on the 25th of the second month of 1857, Ario enrolled as the first student from Hirosaki in the Hirata school. So it took about 50 days from when he sends the letter, 50 days between Kanetane writing his second letter early in the new year of 1857, accompanied by the form, until Ario's reply and completed pledge form arrived in the Ibukinoya and his enrollment became official. Correspondence between the Ibukinoya and students in local communities was also a means of exchanging information on the social and political developments in Edo and nationwide. The following letter, written by Kanetane to Ario and fellow Tsugaru student Imamura Yotaro, conveys the situation in Edo in the fall of 1858. So the letter is dated 19th of the 8th month in 1858. The aforementioned foreign barbarians from America, Russia, England began arriving one after another and onboarded their ships. At this time, France arrived by ship. However, their demands were not met exactly according to their wishes, and although it is not known where they are headed, it is fortunate that at least there was no incident. However, from this event last month, a terrible epidemic has spread, and society is in a state of distress and confusion. You are likely to eventually hear in definite terms. Sorry, the translation is still in progress. I think the cause is completely the Yomi spirit that accompanied the foreign barbarians. Firstly, concerning the death of the Lord Oki, although we cannot say whether that was the cause because of the changes in his illness, rumors such as those stating poisoning are also heard. From the end of last month to this month, this disease has spread widely, and thousands are dying daily. About this illness, first there are chest pains or stomach pains, then sudden diarrhea, sudden fatigue, and generally within half a day one's life expires. Also, during this process, there are cases of possession by a fox spirit. There are people who claim to have seen such a sight. If those with courage dare to inquire further, they say that 1,000 foxes accompanied the Americans who sailed over. There are others who join in this falsehood and say the Nichiren followers brought the foxes, and there was a possessed Buddhist priest, and so great confusion abounds. So Kanetane describes an outbreak of cholera in the summer of 1858, and in xenophobic reaction attributes it to the Yomi spirit accompanying the foreign barbarians from abroad. 1858 is the year when commercial treaties are signed with 5 countries, the US, England, France, Holland, and Russia. And Kanetane describes the distress and confusion of local Edo society. He mentions the death of Lord Oki, or the 13th shogun, Tokugawa Ieyasu. Ieyasu died on the 6th day of the 7th month in 1858, just over a month before this letter was written. Kanetane says that victims of the cholera epidemic numbered in the thousands daily, and he describes the symptoms leading to death. He also cites various rumors of possession by fox spirit, which are attributed to the Americans, Nichirenists, and Buddhist priests. Such rumors may reflect discourse of society at large, as well as that of the Kokugaku-sha community. In this way, Kanetane transmits latest news on social and political developments from Edo to the community of students in Tsugaru. The fourth item I will introduce is a bill for a purchase of books issued by the Ibukinoya to Ario and the Tsugaru group, accompanying Kanetane's letter addressed to them. So this is it here, the titles and the number, the cost of each of the works. Tamadaski volumes 2 and 3 are listed here, and it's also listed again below as a complete set. So we see that books were purchased in some cases in multiple numbers. And from 1853 through the early 1870s, book purchases continue in this manner as they become available and or as demand for them increases. The final letter I will introduce is written by Hirao Rosen, a painter, ethnographer, and central member of the Tsugaru group. The letter is addressed to Rosen's close friend and junior, Shimozawa Yasumi, who was a poet, historian, later Shinto priest at Mount Iwaki Shrine, and fellow member in the Tsugaru group. Also a native of Hirosaki Castle town, Shimozawa lived also in Tokyo and Kyoto, from where he exchanged multiple letters with Rosen, exchanging valuable information on social and political developments with that of Tsugaru. Rosen addresses the following letter to Yasumi in the first year of Meiji. Excuse me, this is the second year of Meiji, when the former is residing in Edo. So this is the letter. Again, it should be 1869 according to the contents. The 11th day of the 6th month. Now, concerning Yufu Shinron, a Matsukami section of 4 books, I desired a review by Master Hirata, and so I sent it to him in autumn of last year. However, soon afterwards, society entered a state of upheaval. All opportunity for correspondence halted, and I was spending my time in disappointment. If you still have the 4 books in their box without having discarded them, I wish you to receive the review of an upper disciple, as I have stated above. And if by chance it can be published, that would fulfill my earnest desire. Therefore, I request you to inquire in this manner. And jumping to the bottom, he writes, I wish to disseminate these works into society as widely as possible. I was surprised to hear the news of our domain, which you informed me about. Concerning the uprising in Matsumae, how I worried at first because of the various rumors. Fearfully, the divine punishment for attacking the emperor is inescapable, I think. It's better. And the imperial forces number at least 4,000. In just 30 days, they broke through 700 places, including narrow roads and difficult terrain, without exception. On the 18th of the 5th month, the remaining 1,002 to 300 of the enemy troops surrendered. 583 of them came to our domain, along with 7 another 7 generals. On the 9th and 11th of the 6th month, they came to Hirosaki and were divided among the 7 temples with the enforcement of heavy security. So in this letter, Rosen writes about his magnum opus, Yufu Shinnon, or New Thesis on the Spiritual Realm, a lengthy 8-volume treatise that augments Atsutane's assertions in Kishin Shinnon, and argues of the existence and workings of Kishin, or spirits, and the invisible Kakuryo realm inhabited by these spirits. Rosen expands Atsutane's thesis by drawing on numerous examples from Chinese and Japanese accounts, as well as legends passed down in his native Tsugaru domain. Rosen completed Yufu Shinnon in 1865, and he states in the above letter that he sent 4 volumes to Kanetane in the previous autumn, seeking a review. With the tumultuous events in Edo surrounding the Meiji Restoration, correspondence with the Academy had ceased, and hence no review at that time. Later on, he does get a review. Rosen sends his many writings and works of art and clearly states his desire to spread them in society through the head school. Rosen then gives a report on the uprising in Matsumae, referring to the Battle of Hakodate, the last battle of the Boshin War from 1868 to 69, and the surrender of the Bakufu forces on the 18th day of the 5th month. Rosen's report on the Boshin War and Tsugaru domain's place in it is very significant, not only as a record of a commoner's perspective, but as part of a discourse between fellow Hirata disciples discussing loyalty to the imperial court. In the 5th month of 1868, the Oetsu Alliance is formed between domains of Mutsu and Dewa provinces, as well as domains of Ichiko province in defense of the Bakufu forces. However, only months afterwards, still in the same year, Tsugaru, or Hirosaki, left this alliance and shifted its loyalty to the imperial court, thus aligning itself on the side of the new government and imperial forces. In this letter, Rosen states the severe divine punishment awaiting the rebel forces of the old Bakufu for opposing the emperor. And he describes the imperial forces' strength and cause for victory over the Bakufu forces, and how the surrendering troops coming to Hirosaki were divided among 7 temples. While not involved in the direct fighting of the war, Rosen gives account of the imperial victory, and we also see the accuracy of the date, the 18th of the 5th month, as the date when the Bakufu army surrenders to the imperial army. So in summary and conclusion, what we looked at, we looked at the enrollment of disciples into the Ibukine Academy as Atsutane's direct disciples, according to the Academy's policy. And we also looked at some discussion about ancestral worship and the food that was offered to the spirit of Atsutane. We looked at the pledge and how it was sent with the letter, and how it took 50 days for this enrollment to happen. And Akita comes up quite a bit in the letters, and this is something I wish to pursue in the future. Tsugaru's relations with Akita. There's mention of that letter, person that was delivering the letter. Also, the fact that the portrait of Atsutane was painted in Akita, and also Akita's influence on Tsugaru domain when they leave the Oetsu Alliance. And we see this kind of connection with Akita going through the Ibukineya, which is kind of interesting to me. So I want to see if there's any direct contact. I also talked about book orders and the publishing situation, and the exchange of social and political information, the spread of cholera in Edo, the fear of the stir caused by the arrival of Westerners, and also exchange of information on the Boshin War. And this discussion of the Boshin War and their discourse on loyalty to the emperor will allow me to talk about the Meiji Restoration from the perspective of northern Japan. And in that last letter that we looked at, we saw the excitement that Dosen feels and this sense of urgency to publish his works through the head school in 1868 and 69. He's got these great expectations for his scholarship, but eventually sees the reality of modernization, and these aspirations sort of end in disappointment. And this is a similar storyline to the one that we see in Shimazaki Toson's Before the Dawn, where there we also see a local kokugakusha who, whose sort of visions of this new dawn are kind of disappointed by Japan's modernization. And so as I advance my project, I want to look at how this Before the Dawn story unfolds in the context of Tsugaru and northern Japan.